So out of all this, really with today's exercise, and we kind of just want to jump into it, I want to help present a way for you to really understand the fundamentals on how to really create your digital study. So specifically what we're going through within Transeller is really presenting a way to map between the USDM and DDF models. So really how we're able to do that is using that Excel file, that Excel tool that we're going to show you a data content for. So within it, there's really these two tools. So it's this documentation, and it's really this documentation. It's going to be a quick review guide. It's going to be a summary. It's really just a summary of everything I'm going to talk about today. So really just connecting the overall structure you'll find within coding, within JSON, aligned to the centralized theme, the DDF model. So how do you really incorporate that structure into the DDF model? And really, the answer is USDM. So providing some of that business structure on the dictionaries, we'll be able to really map all the different pieces together to really build your overall study. So that's for context. Let's move over here. So jumping into our Excel file. So really out of all this, I'm going to present you this Excel file, and I'm only going to reference the DDF model once, just because I don't want to jump back and forth. But the overall idea when really just creating your digital study, you have your study details, you have your parameters, your schema. Like really, what are you trying to create? So within Excel, we have these fields here. So everything within your study details, you'll add your title. You even have your population, you have your arms. How are you going to actually create your study schema? So in this example, we're creating a two dose group arm study. So we have dose group A and we have dose group B. We also are indicating it's a phase three interventional. So really, you see out of all this, these are all the different study details and study metadata that you're able to find and map through USDM. So all of the different metadatas are now formatted into really a flexible way on creating your study. So creating your study outside inward, you've created all your metadata. We've aligned some of our objectives and we've associated our endpoints to our objectives. So even moving forward, we also have the indications. So all of the different granular details, all of the different metadata is structured and formatted really through this Excel tool. So from there, after really populating your study design, the second focus is really creating your SOA. So within it, take take this first component as really a summary. So your summary table of your SOA. We know it's all that information, all of the metadata associated to each different component of your SOA will again be further defined down below throughout each component. So I'm going to quickly jump into, actually, no, sorry. My intention was going through what's found in the SOA. So first, we really have our epic. Within this, the details for this intent is really we have three periods. We have a screening period. We have a treatment period, which we know we defined as arm A and arm B. And we also have a follow-up period. So really, it's the outermost layer of creating your visit schedule. The most granular detail is your visit. So from this logic, we have a screening visit associated to the EPIC screening. We also know within our treatment EPIC, we have visits defined between cycle 1 all the way through cycle 9, day 1. And within a follow-up, we have a follow-up visit as well. So take it as your first component is really your visit schedule. The second component are your assessments. So in this case, we have a lot of CRFs, informed consent. We have a hematology associated to your lab safeties. And we also have some dosing and plasma biomarkers. So more of the biomarker, more of endpoint focused. So that's your second component, all of your assessments. Your third component is creating that collection, creating that association, saying, well, we only need informed consent at screening. There's no need at any other phases or any other periods within your study. So take it as that's your general SOA. So quickly to map it back to the DDF model, just to show how to that hierarchy. So you saw within Excel, it's a lot of free flowing. It's tables here, it's tables in this column, tables in that row. Out of all of it, all of the alignment, all of the data structure is really found within your data model. And the idea is through USDM, you're able to define, well, how do you generate an endpoint? How do you generate an objective, which ultimately defines your study design? So that's really the benefit of this Excel tool. It's pulling all of those ways to really capture all that granular detail to populate your true content of your digital study. So again, just looking at this as an example, we've seen how endpoints are affected with objectives and associated back to your study design. So really what I just went through too is your visit schedule for your SOA. So within the DDF model, we're actually seeing it's how to actually build your SOA is actually captured through your study cell, which is associated to many different sort of bubbles, sort of associations, data models. So we have here your epic, which I define as really your outermost layer. And then you see the association, the one-to-one directly to your visit. So your visit is your encounter. So really from there, that is the most basic way to start creating your structure. This is really the last time I'm going to reference it, but you can see there is a study element. There's also your activities, which are not a direct linkage to your epics or encounter, but is actually associated all the way back to your study design. So you take it out of all this. There's a lot of data, but this model, this structure, will really help you really create your structured study design. So looking at this, we've referenced our general SOA. So let's really look at how we can incorporate more of the metadata fields found within USDM. So we have really just further ways of defining each component. So the first component is your epic. Like I mentioned, take it as your outermost layer. And really within it, you have a couple of drop-down menus or drop-down and controlled lists. These are really ways to just structure it, help further define it. So at an epic, at your outermost layer, you're typically objectively more open. You really are trying to simplify it because we have further components such as your element and your visit that can help further define what's found within your epic. So within this study schema, as I mentioned, we have two dose groups, arm A and arm B. And through a study element, which is essentially a way to further define your epic, I can say that, well, my epic, my singular epic, treatment, parentheses, arm A and arm B, is further defined by saying we have a arm A and we have an arm B. And through these other metadata fields, we're able to pinpoint, well, arm A is associated to drug one standard of care. And the metadata fields helped to further define it. It's really just time points. So a start and end rule. However, so throughout all of this, we have arm A, we have arm B, which are assigned to the different two drugs or the different drugs standard of care. But through our summary, we understand, or at least I understand on a business point, that all the collections through this SOA, the collections for hematology are exactly the same for patients going through arm A or arm B. So same idea, the SOA is a summary, and these are just further ways to define your study and your visit schedule. So going back, we went through epics, we went through elements on creating your outermost layer. Your innermost layer is really the visits. So this is really where, same idea, we can help further define all of your visits, which ultimately are categorized or compartmentalized under epics. So within it, visits follow the same logic. There's a start and end rule that provides you sense of time, so therefore a sense of order. We also have standard names. So essentially how you name a visit is going to have to be standardized, knowing that visit name, that standard name affects a lot of different aspects looking at that DDF model. So other metadata that we have are also contact nodes. So, how is this visit initiated? We also have environmental settings. So where is this visit taking in place? So all of those details, they really help define your visits, which help create your own standards of how logical is it to capture a cycle 1 day 1 versus a cycle 1 day 1 pre-dose or even a end of infusion visit, so your PK sample. So this visit table will help you capture all of that detail. So from there, you really built out through your Epic elements and visit your visit schedule. So that second component of your general SOA is your assessments and activities. So same idea. You can think of them as separate entities, which ultimately through the DDF map with USDM, you can create that logic of creating your overall study design. So looking at it, the activities and assessments follow the same logic. It has other metadata fields help further defined by USDM to really capture how you define your activity and assessment. So in this case, we have a general description of, what is a hematology? It's a lab assessment using or captured through blood samples. Other metadata fields are procedures. So this is a blood sample. Other assessments used for this blood sample. So these assays. So we're looking at the red blood cell count, the hematocrit. So same idea throughout it all. The USDM really helps define all of those details, captures all of that, and really helps provide that structure with the DDF model. So out of it all, with your visits, with your activities, through your general SOA, you've created those associations. So really this Excel file, in summary, is really just the two basic components. All of your study parameters, and then really how do you build your SOA. So from there, I'll end it here. And really just open it to any general questions, comments, or we can pass it to Berber for any other follow-up discussions.
Perfect. Thank you, Alan. So any questions, feel free to use the hand feature in Teams or just shout them out. Yeah, Carlo, you're
so
the first
I
person.
Couldn't quite. Yeah. So let me just back up, and I don't know if you can bring up the Excel spreadsheet again.
So just to mention in between, I will go into more technical detail in this. So if you have very technical questions, maybe you can wait till I've done my part. But if you have more general questions, we can handle it now.
Well, let me phrase it and then see where it might make sense to talk to it. So what I'm wondering about is the connection between the epics, the arms, and then the visits. And if you look down a little bit, exactly right there. Yep. And so in row 75, where it says cycle 1, day 1, the start rule of 2 hours before treatment, that would typically be understood as a screening assessment because it's occurring prior to the actual start of treatment in and of itself. What I'm not seeing here, and I don't know if it's something that would be addressed in a later part, is how would you be able to differentiate cycle 1, day 1 assessments that occur prior to treatment and so should be in screening versus those that occur after treatment and therefore should be in the treatment epic?
Yeah, so you're free to set up your own study and your own way of filling this. So epoch is really a phase in the study. So if you as a company define that the 2 hours before treatment, the pre-dose assessments do not belong to the treatment epoch, but that they still belong to the screening epoch, of course, then you can design that. Although I think that might be a little bit difficult in your reflection in the schedule of activity, but that's doable. So that's up to you how you want to what the content will be.
So to come at that another way, there may be cycle 1, day 1 assessments that are post first dose and therefore are treatment. Is there a way in the current modeling to differentiate within a visit whether the assessments are in one epoch or another? Basically the boundary consideration.
Yeah, so then you have an extra column in your schedule of activity where you have an extra phase. So the companies I worked for until now did just regard those just before dosing assessments as during the treatment epoch. So they were in the treatment phase, but technically, strictly speaking, you are of course right, because it's just before treatment, but then you will just have an extra column in your schedule of activity table which addresses that part or something like that. Or your start rule is just different. Then you say, okay, my start rule is a start of treatment. So it depends on how you want to plan your activities and how you want to capture that. So the model is quite flexible in that. So it just depends on your definitions, not of Transcelerate.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Carla. Yeah, I was going to say, isn't that fuzzy? I think it's an incompleteness in the model. And the reason is that on a more abstract level, the general statement is that an encounter or a visit can start in one trial element and end in another trial element. And as a consequence, it can start in one epoch and end in another epoch. So if you have only one relationship from an encounter to an epoch, the question is it a start or the end, or do you need two relationships? So in that sense, the model is incomplete of what is actually happening. I think it's the reason why, and it's the reason why in the SDTM trial design models, you won't see a reference from the TV dataset to the epochs, right, for this reason, because you would either need the start and the end relationship, or if you have only one, the models should say take start or take end, or what was just said is, well, it's up to you to decide that, which leaves things in the middle in my mind.
Yes, so I understand the point. I think I had this discussion before with the CDISC people. Actually, epoch is kind of a phase, and we've regarded that as a phase. So in theory, you can then say, okay, we divide that epoch in two different phases, in two different epochs, because all the assessments will be taken at one particular time point, whether that's before or whether the after, and then we call it not a visit but an encounter. So you can also say that it's two different encounters. Then, although you are staying at the same place, so you need to have some way of linking this this phasing of the trial with the visits, and this was the way we chose to do it. Any other questions?
Yes, I do have one question. So basically, is this model supports biomedical concepts? Because I think in one of the variables, we do have a field where we are capturing that ECRF kind of a link, right? So does this model supports the biomedical concepts?
Not at the moment yet. So where it stops is that assessment description, where you see that assessment name, red blood cells, and assessment description. And we will look into the next phase in how we can link or incorporate biomedical concepts things to also enable better EDC linkage.
Okay, and my next follow-up question is that are we also maintaining or storing those transition rules between, different forms? I mean, just take an example of vital signs or, the demographics or adverse event. So the transition rules that we normally have in the EDC setup. So are we maintaining or storing those rules? Because I think one of the primary use cases will be, from this USDM model, we will try to automate the EDC setup, the CRF setup. So are we still exploring, or is this model, mature enough to capture all those things which are required from a...
So.
Yeah,
No.
okay.
It is those transition rules are more like the SDTM transition rules. So I don't think that's the thing. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Any other
Hello,
question?
I have a question. So what's the granularity of the encounters or the visits? Is it at the cycle and day level, or does it go further below?
You can make that as granular as possible, although I think we've in first instance looked at the day level, and then maybe in the next phase we need to look at the time points within a day, because that's probably what you are referring to.
That is correct.
But yeah, so you have a contact mode and environmental settings. So in most cases it would be more like the day. And yeah, it's a very good point that we need to look into that time point part.
Okay.
Any other question?
May I ask you to scroll up on the top to the top header section? Thank you. So we have the objectives, the indications, and the interventions. Okay, thank you.
So
Yeah.
one last question from my side. So I think we are also not capturing the inclusion and the exclusion criteria, right, at a study design level right now in this model?
Yeah, that's true. We envisaged to do that, but we wanted to do that at a very granular level, and then it appeared to be very complex. So we wanted to wait to do that properly.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Luke, shall I continue with the more technical part?
Yeah, I think so. That's probably good. Good opportunity.
Okay, then I will start share my screen, although it's the same Excel. Only that Alan had some did make it a little bit smaller in some cases. So what I wanted to explain to you, and I wanted to link this information to the actual input, the API input, the JSON input. To the reason that we made this shell is also to show you how the data that you see in the protocol or in the study designer can be mapped to the JSON files, can be stored in the USDM format. And of course, that also during the process helped us to see any caveats or missing links and so on. And being the first version, I think we can already do quite a lot, but we can also learn based on this, and we will also map new studies in a similar kind of way. You have, of course, the JSON examples. You can find one on the GitHub with all information of a sample study in it. And all those JSON parts, they have like, they are partitioned. So you have your study title, you have your study phase, study identifiers, and so sometimes you have some nesting in that. So what you see in this example is, for example, also the study title here. But what I did is all those partitions that are in the JSON file, I put here as separate tabs. So here you have the tab for the clinical study, and all these variables that you see here are also in the JSON file. So we have a study ID. I made up some study ID, you have the study version, study title, study type, and this one is coded, so it links to a code. It's a CDISC coding system, and then it is also decoded. So what you can see, if you go into such a field, then you see that there is a reference in this field, you see? So that references to all the information on the first tab. So if you want to know what information is going into this variable, and also this one I left empty, but if you want to know what information needs to go there, then you can find that on the corresponding shelled tab. So this is referring to field B4. So that's here. I have no study version yet here, but if I say, okay, this is version 1.5 or something like that, then you will see that that information is now here as well. It's not something you should use in using the SDR, but it's just for your understanding that you know, okay, this information lands here in the JSON file. If we then look into this study type, here you have interventional. That study type is coming from B10, so that's filled here. And you see we have the list with what Ellen already showed, the list of control terminology that is available. And the CDISC controlled terminology that they already provided with the model. And this list is also represented here together with the corresponding code. So that code is also retrieved here, so it's directly linked with the lookup function. So then we have the information that is coming from, on the one side, the study information, and on the one side from the coding system. So in some cases, I refer to another tab, so you can just link to that other tab. And then here, for example, you see all the study identifiers that are coming from this one. So one study can have different study identifiers with different kinds of organizations that provide that study identifier or create that study identifier. So it can be a sponsor study identifier, can be a registry or a regulatory agency, and then it can have an ID as well and a name. So this information is then stored here in the model with a new UUID and also the information that is copied from the information that's filled as study design information. The organization also has an organization type, which is also selected at the shell, and then it looks up the corresponding code, which is provided by CDISC. So that will be the information that is should be stored in this way in the JSON file. So back to the clinical study. So we also have the study phase, which is entered at the front in the shell with corresponding coding, and we have the study protocol versions, what you see here. So the study protocol versions that stores the brief title, official title, amendments, and again, all this information is presented here. So you can then see, okay, if I fill this information here, then where's that? The brief protocol title. This is a brief title. Where was my? Okay. That one was just had a wrong link. So that was not okay. So if we change the visual study title, that one is in study design. So I need to look at that one because that has a wrong link. So I will correct that one. However, the next one, I think I will skip the study designs because that one is the more complex one, as you know. And then we have, of course, the study objectives. You see, I didn't have a lot of time, so I think most of it is correct, but I will correct these, the link and the other one, a reference before sending it out. So here you see the study objectives. So you will have different objectives who have a corresponding objective level with the corresponding code, which is again looked up in the CDISC table. And then we can have more than one endpoint description for every objective. So that can also be tested using the shell to see, okay, if I put in a new endpoint description here, like adverse events count or something like that, then you will see that will link to that objectives endpoint description. And again, the level with the corresponding codes. And then we go to study designs. So here we are in the study design, and then in the study design class, you have the intervention model, the trial intent type, trial type. So these are all coded. So we get this information from the shell, and then the corresponding code is added. We also have a link to study indications. This is also information with code. You can, for the indications, you can use different coding systems with the corresponding codes, coding system version, and then the decoded version, which is also referring to that indications on the front page. That is filled here.
Just a question. At some point, are you covering the study workflow?
Yes, that's the next step. So based on study designs, you also can go into the investigational intervention. So I will go a little bit more quickly. So the interventions also coming from are also one or more, and every intervention can have one or more codes. If you want to both code it with the SNOMED and with Medera, for example, then you can add more codes for one intervention. So that's why I have an example here with 2 rows. So you can nest it as needed. Just to give you a quick reference to, we have the protocol versions, we have the we have done the interventions. So here you see that intervention description, and then one example with code, but you can nest as many codes as you like. So this nesting is equal to the nesting I showed in the Excel file. What was the one that I also had? Intervention, populations, objectives, and then we have study cells and study workflows, and both will link to the schedule of activities. But the study cells is more on a design level, like SDTM like. So here you see, okay, I have one study design where we link to the study arm with all the corresponding information. And then this is information that is coming from these arm descriptions, with the corresponding description, and then a type, which is again more control terminology, and then the origin type, and then the origin itself. So all this information will go into that study cells, study arm description. And we have the epoch information. The reason that you have this information double is because this is a study cell, and every cell is a combination of an arm, of an epoch, which is a study phase, and of an element. So if the arm is present in more phases, more epochs, then you will have, in this case, three times the same arm in combination with screening, with treatment, and with follow-up. So that's the reason why we have it 3 times here. And then here you see the cell has an arm, it has an epoch, and it has also the element here, element information. Yeah, that's here. And again, you see that the follow-up element and screening element are used 2 times. For every arm, it's the same element. So then you see it twice here, but then in a different combination for the arm. So that's why in the shell, we also have links from this arm information and of this study phase epoch information to these tables below, because you want to further detail the epochs. So this is the description that you use in the table, but this is the standardized control terminology, and you want to have both, and then you can store that in the JSON file. And then if you want to show it for the reader, then you can present this description, but in the background you also have the standard term that you want to use for submissions or so. Same holds for elements. Here we only have the start and end rules added, and the element description and an element name. And we did the same for the visits that we defined in our schedule of activities. So these are really the visits that we wanted to show in our schedule of activities. And then we also can add a standardized contact mode and a standardized environmental setting, which is also captured in the model. So that is linked to the study workflow. Where are you? Here. So here you see for every activity, what was let me go to the start. You have a workflow description. So can be anything, can be description. Okay, this is the schedule of activity, table 1, if you have more than one schedule of activities. And then in the workflow item description, you can store the value that's actually in the schedule of activities. So it can be only the X or the dot, but maybe you want to add some information there. So then you can vary that based on the needs and based on your system. You have the activity description that you want to have as background information. You have the activity name. And again, this is also linking back to the information in the front tab, so you can find out what information is stored where in the model. We also have procedures. I only linked one procedure. I thought we had one procedure there, so that's the third thing that I need to add as well. We have here one, the obtain blood and obtain plasma, so I will add them as well, but that is the information that will, of course, land here. And we have
Gerber, I'm trying to understand. So we have made the activity definitions, let's say on the shred, right? On the shred. And what is the difference between that activity definition there and the workflow here? So is it just that if there is more than one SOA table, then it associates the activities to the table?
So this is the same information as you see here. So this is just representing the JSON. The JSON code. So if we have the workflow, study workflows, then you see here workflow items. And what I wanted to explain with this Excel is how the information of a schedule of activity can be stored in this way. So actually each workflow item is a cell in the schedule of activity. You understand?
Okay.
So this is the information that you see in the schedule of activity. If I go to B40 in this cell, then B40 is B40. That's this one. You see?
Biochemistry.
Yeah, biochemistry screening at screening. So the encounter is screening at a visit, and the assessment is biochemistry. So the workflow item links that biochemistry to the encounter, to the screening. Yeah. So, and so that's what's happening here. So here the workflow item description is just an X, but then it links that biochemistry with all the corresponding information on procedures and assessments that are being done then to the encounter, which is in this case screening, you see?
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah. And then, of course, you have all the information that corresponds to that visit, including the screening. With the start rules and the end rules of the encounter, and so on and so on and so on. So that's in this version of the JSON, how the schedule of activity information is stored. And now I just do a small step out to the estimates, because that's stored as well. You see the estimate information here, which links to the treatment, which is already an intervention that's stored in the intervention tab. And an analysis population, which is different from a study population. It can be intent to treat, per protocol, safety analysis population. The endpoint, which are already the endpoints that are stored with the objectives. And that's the variable of interest here. And then it also links to intercurrent events. And also that is added to that shell here, so that you can see how that, you see here the LM estimates. So I've copied the exact description of the endpoint here, and then I added an estimate name. So all the green fields you can fill in yourself and change yourself, and then in the other tabs you can see how that changes. And then some intercurrent events that might happen, which you like to store in the JSON file. So of course I'm limited by the possibilities of Excel, because if you have like a more relational model or another way of storing your data, you can of course extend this in another way and store it in a better way and link it better. But it's really just to show you how the data from a study design links to the JSON JSON fields. I think because we only have 10 minutes left, that we should start with questions. Luke?
Yeah, I was going to say we have a couple questions in the chat I want to make sure that we get to. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and raise your hand and we'll call on you. While we're doing that, I know Eric, you asked about is it possible to expand the number of rows, for example, in activities, or do we have to stick to the actual rows in the Excel file as shown?
Yeah, so in the Excel file, I think I only did a limited number of rows because it was done manual just to show, but of course the number of activities and encounters and so on are in the model are unlimited.
Another question we had from Jeff, it seems to represent epoch as a structural/design element rather than a reporting element. Is that, Jeff, is there a question behind that, or is that just observation?
That was primarily just an observation. We've tried to use epoch, not like within metadata, but sort of within a fire working group, and we've tried to use the epoch as a design element, but you run into all the problems that Frederick was talking about in terms of we end up with one thing with feet in 2 camps, which becomes very difficult to manage. Whereas epoch, if you treat it as kind of something you look at when you're looking at the data sets at the end of the study rather than something you try to design the study around, it seems a lot more straightforward.
Yeah, so the description you can show in the schedule of activities, and as such, as you always will have, like the header row will not stop at half an encounter. I think that's the point. But I think the semantics are important here, and I think it's good that we look into that to be very clear on also for future studies and also about this issue, because as I told you, we discussed this before to make sure that we are clear on how it is used and what we mean with it, or maybe we should rename it or something like that. But it's a good point, and we can look into it.
Is it related to like the subject reference start date from like STTM, for example? Because that's a wee bit of a movable feast. You can define subject participation on the study slightly differently to maybe just sort of the traditional epochs. I don't know. That's something that's always been a wee bit confusing, I think, in terms of defining what is the treatment period. Is the treatment period, strictly speaking, the point at which they start receiving the study medication, or is it the treatment period treated as something like from the point of randomization? I don't like. That's always been a wee bit ambiguous to me.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that there are just different opinions between different companies on that. So, and maybe we should account for both or something like that. But it's really important to acknowledge that.
Right, but what Jeff was saying that in the work that he's doing, it's a problem to have an encounter that starts in one epoch and ends in another one, and that's not just invented by Jeff or me. So if you read the SDTM IG, it's explicitly stated in there, and they point out to be careful about it, that this is the reality of a trial. This is how it should be modeled, that it can start in one epoch and another epoch. And what is, I think, semantically maybe a subtlety, but then leads to mistakes, is if you're going to use epochs as study event groupings, what we do here, which is the way that often the schedule gets printed in the protocol, a study event grouping is not synonymous with an epoch. Many times, just by reading the titles, it seems like it is, because you have screening, treatment, follow-up, and that's also how your epochs work. But then if you go into more detail on the start and end points of these events, then it doesn't match up anymore. So I think semantically we need to make a distinction between an epoch as a design element, as Jeff says, and a study event grouping, what we're seeing here in the SOA, in grouping events together in, multiple hierarchies. Another grouping could be that you have, sometimes you see cycle as a grouping and then treatment above it, right? Yeah. These are just groupings, but it's not the study design element, which is actually the epoch. And having to change the epochs to accommodate the way it's modeled here right now is also not the solution. So I think in a future version of the USDM, I think we should really revisit that. And I think the SDS team might be interested in that discussion as well.
Yes, that's good. And I think, yeah, as I said, so it's good to look into that and to see the difference. So I think our approach is the same as the FIRE group with that grouping. And the studies I've done, there was not a real difference between that grouping, as you call it, and the epochs, but I know that there are different opinions on that. So it's good to look into that. So I see that.
Let's go ahead and switch over to the people who have their hands raised. The questions that are in the chat, I'll make sure are followed up in an email, replied in written in an email. So Subo, did you have a question?
Yeah. Yes. So look, my question is more from a process perspective, not on the model or how it is the limitation, and specifically because our submission is based on that SDR host migration sort of a category, right? So my question is a bit obvious. Are we going to treat this Excel, the shelled worksheet specifically, as our input file when we actually show our modeling into USDM?
Yeah, I believe the option is there for you to use as Excel if you do have sample data of your own. If you do have sample data, or if you're willing to generate dummy data that is USDM compliant, I think you could use that in addition to the data that's generated from this Excel, or you could use it instead of. This was just meant to be kind of a bare minimum tool to allow everyone to have access.
Brilliant. So what we can do is probably use this as a template and have our own data and sort of show the modeling the way it is populated in the other worksheets, right?
Correct. Yeah. If you have additional features of your solution of your project that this set of data does not showcase, then you will have to generate data to showcase that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But I think this Excel is quite comprehensive, so we will be able to cover pretty much everything that we are going to showcase. So this is good. Brilliant. Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, and Karyav. Sorry.
Sorry, just going off mute. Yes, so apart from this definition of the data within the USDM, one of the challenges is the use of the standard. So is there any correlation between the standards and this spreadsheet here? I did see for the code list, but other than the code list, was there any other correlation shared here?
So if you look into the code lists, that these are the code lists with the corresponding codes. So these are also presented at the shell. You can select at the right place. You will see the lookup box with the corresponding code lists. So that's the one hand, and the other hand, the USDM model with those different classes. They are translated into that JSON file, and that's actually the same as that linked classes in that figure that Ellen showed you at the beginning. I'm not sure whether I answer your question completely with it.
Well, to a certain extent you did. I do have a follow-up question. So in terms of, after defining the information in the USDM, is there any downstream consumption aspect also going to be covered, or that's just part of the feature that we can demonstrate?
I think, Luke, can you answer that one? Because I think there's both upstream and downstream, eh?
Yeah, sorry, could you repeat the question? I'm not sure I understood it.
Right. So here is a definition of a study, right? With its study details, objectives, indications, so etc. Are there any, in terms of the data flow, are there any specific examples or cases that you are looking forward for coverage in terms of consuming this information downstream or upstream for a specific purpose, like let's say EDC setup?
Yeah, so EDC automation is kind of the primary use case that we've been working with DDF for. In terms of the Connectathon, there's not a specific endpoint or a specific use case, I guess, that we're really trying to prove. It's more it should be more seen as an opportunity to explore the how data can be shared between solutions and between upstream and downstream points. It's much more about kind of the connectivity. I mean, that's why we're calling this a Connectathon. So it's less about proving specific workflows and proving specific use cases, more about showing that connectivity can be reached between upstream and downstream solutions. Is that a good enough answer?
That answers my question. Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. And I know we're over. Shilp, if you have one last quick question, we can probably answer it real quick.
Sure, I will make it quick. So look, my question is that whenever we are trying to push a study to SDR UI application, I mean that study is going to be accessible by who all? I mean, is going to be available for public domain, or is going to be available only for the track leads?
It should be available.
So basically, as a part of
so this is part of the latest revision of the SDR, I believe, was putting up firewall.
Right. So basically, under
firewall.
No, not regarding that, because under this interoperability track, what we are trying to do is that we are trying to push one of our sample study that we have created to this SDR UI application. So we just wanted to understand that study is going to be accessible by all the participants, vendors, or is going to have limited accessibility only to the track leads?
I believe it's going to have limited accessibility. I'll follow up and make sure that that's true with our Accenture resources. That I'll send an email and include you on that, and I'll also distribute that answer to the rest of the event. I believe the answer is that it will not be available to everyone. It certainly won't be available publicly. I want to make sure that the latest SDR release is the features are what I believe.
Okay.
And I know everyone, we're over time now, but I just one quick thank you to Berber and Alan for jumping in here and giving us this presentation. I will follow up with an email with this recording attached or linked, and then also some of the documents, some of the answers to the written questions in the chat. If there are any other questions, please reach out and we'll address things as they come up. We're looking forward just under a week now officially, so we're looking forward to the event. If there's anything we can help with in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.